Video games don't kill people. I do.
All this stuff.
Such a waste.
Negation mechanics are a finicky part of TF2, but what is a negation mechanic? Negation mechanics are attributes to items in TF2 whose use reduces or removes certain aspects of gameplay. There aren't just a few of these weapons floating around in the mercenary's arsenal. There are quite a few weapons and items with a variety of negating qualities. Some of these items are perfectly balanced, others, not so much. It kind of feels like your teeth are getting ripped out of your fucking skull when you're playing against them. So I'm going to be covering some weapons that execute negation mechanics poorly, and others that are perfectly balanced and execute negation mechanics in the most ideal way possible.
Benji? What? Stop hiding behind your little toys and fight like a man!
You should ought to brought more guns, son.
What?
Negation mechanics typically fall under one of three categories: reversal, partial negation, and full negation. This last one is the problematic one. Reversal mechanics essentially reverse incoming damage back onto the enemy, the only example of which being the Pyro's air blast. Partial negation mechanics are those that reduce rather than completely remove. This includes every item that carries some form of passive or active damage resistance when in use, including the Demo Man's shields, the battalion's backup, or the Vaccinator. Full negation mechanics are items that completely remove some aspect of TF2's gameplay, or reduce it beyond some reasonable threshold to where it might as well even be there.
I get it, because there's a sniper protecting it. Where did he shoot me from?
See, teamwork! I slowed him down, he couldn't get away. Oh.
This is the problematic type in most cases. These items are inherently flawed in their design, mainly because most full negation mechanics are typically too easy to achieve, and they dramatically reduce skill in the gameplay equation entirely. Rather than rewarding the practiced skill of a user, full negation mechanics bring everyone else down to the level of the user to fight them on their lower playing field.
We just
Hi,
have
Scout.
2 inches!
You can't move anymore, so you die.
Effectively making the skill of aggressors irrelevant. In my eyes, there are 3 serious offenders that fall under this full negation category that should be addressed. And starting us off,
I have to use that.
this weapon has always been designed around a full negation mechanic: the removal of nearby projectiles at the cost of metal. In other words, prevention of building destruction by fully negating 2 classes that are direct counters to the engineer's buildings. Unfortunately, the short circuit goes well beyond this by effectively removing all damage from nearby soldiers and demomen, not only to the engineer's buildings and to himself, but to the rest of his team that is nearby. These issues create a hard counter. The short circuit gives an automatic advantage for the engineer and his nearby teammates over an enemy team with soldiers and demomen simply because the engineer is using it. Soldiers and demomen must be swapped for something else that can do non-projectile based damage, otherwise the enemy team is more than likely to win, especially in an offensive scenario. Even in a 1v1 against the short circuit engineer, soldiers and demomen are at an automatic disadvantage. They have to deal with, at minimum, 3 short circuit orbs before they can even deal damage, unless the soldier is using a shotgun. The fact that the short circuit fully negates the primary damage dealing capabilities of not 1 but 2 classes at the simple click of a button over a fairly large area with little aim to make use of makes the short circuit simply too powerful. This type of full negation mechanic does not belong in the game. My solution for the short circuit is that it should be reworked to do something else entirely. Make the weapon increase building longevity somehow without increasing the user's and his team's longevity against 2 classes. Next up, we have the Scorch Shot. The main negation mechanic of the Scorch Shot is its knockback, and for some reason it can destroy sticky bombs. I don't know why, they just opted to put that one in there without even mentioning it in the weapon's stats, but hey, fuck it, why not? A direct hit from a Scorch Shot flare stun locks the target,
forcing them into a lovely, brief instance of immobility that is completely out of their control, mind you, that leaves them completely open for additional attack from the pyro or nearby players. The stun lock also more or less guarantees that you will get hit by the flare again, since, guess what? Scorch Shot flares can hit the same player twice and deal mini crits. It's an incredibly frustrating experience getting knocked around, then having to deal with full afterburn damage, and having your ability to dodge put on hold simply because the pyro fired the Scorch Shot in your general direction. That's really the biggest problem with the Scorch Shot. The negation mechanics involved wouldn't be so bad if the hitbox and explosion radius were smaller. Unfortunately, the
Hitbox of the flare is the size of a fucking Ford F-150!
Please, someone clip that.
This lets pyros easily spam projectiles across the map, onto the floor, or down hallways, and lets splash damage do the work for him. My solution for the Scorch Shot is to make it do less, because what can it not do currently? You can hit multiple targets with its explosive flare. You can hit the same target twice. Successive hits on targets deal mini crits. You don't have to hit your target with the flare to deal full afterburn, just the explosion. Flares have knockback that completely kills the momentum of players, leaving them briefly immobile and open to all kinds of attack. You can flare jump with it, and it destroys sticky bombs. It does too much. Remove the knockback ability from the Scorch Shot. Then I think it will be at least a little bit more palatable for the average player. Let it be that Fisher-Price gun for newer pyros that can't aim flares, but still want a reward when they can't hit their shots anyway. If it wasn't obvious at this point, I loathe weapons that impede movement in TF2. Speaking of movement, the third item on my list, last and certainly least, the Natasha. I don't have much to say about this weapon since many others have already done so for me, but I will say this much. Why does a weapon whose primary purpose is to negate movement even exist in a first-person shooter that is designed around rewarding movement? It is the most counterintuitive weapon in the game and has existed for over 10 years! Get rid of it! Rebalance it! Do something! There are honorable mentions in the game that are more along the lines of minor offenders with this negation issue, specifically the Wrangler and the Vaccinator. The Wrangler is broken. We all know this. You can triple the health of your sentry gun just by swapping to it. It negates way too much damage with a simple weapon switch. The Wrangler is not that bad of an offender, since you give up letting the game aim for you in exchange for a double DPS 303 health mini-sentry or a 654 health level 3. That's still not very well balanced. The Vaccinator is effectively the worst medigun in the game in the hands of someone that doesn't know how to use it. But it becomes insanely overpowered in the hands of someone that does. In the latter case, it's too easy to partially negate an insane amount of incoming damage. If you spread heals fairly well, you are constantly building Vaccinator Uber and can always be negating 75% of at least one damage type on at least one person, including yourself. And if you rotate resistance types well, you and at least one other healing target, potentially multiple, might as well be fully stock Ubered the entire time. Thankfully, the rest of the items in TF2 that have negation mechanics are either minor nuisances at most, or are perfectly balanced. For example, the Pyro's Air Blast. It takes projectile damage that could be potentially done to your team and reverses it back onto the enemy team, aside from sticky bombs and of course, the Pyro himself, herself, itself, since reflecting Pyro's risk taking mini crits. The Air Blast does affect player movement, but at least it isn't a total stun lock like it used to be. It's much easier to get away from it now since the momentum of the air blasted victim depends on the momentum of the air blasting Pyro. In my eyes, the Air Blast is a decently balanced negation mechanic. While the Air Blast does screw around with movement a little bit, the projectile reflection requires at least some semblance of aim to make use of. And its area of effect is fairly limited, unlike the short circuit. My only major complaint with the Air Blast is that reflected projectiles should not do mini crits. It's a little too brutal for a potentially one-shot kill on 5 out of 9 classes at full health, at the simple click of a button with a short-range AoE. An example of a perfectly executed partial negation mechanic is the battalion's backup. I don't think I will ever be able to overplay just how underrated this item is. You sacrifice a shotgun, that is, attack power, for the opportunity to fully negate crits, mini crits, and partially negate all other types of damage. But it takes 600 damage to charge the item, rewarding your ability to stay alive and aim rockets in order to use it. Plus, the banner must be spent carefully in order for it to be effective. It rewards good coordination with your team to spread the resistance around as much as possible.
That pretty much wraps up my points about negation mechanics. A lot of weapons that are tied into this type of balancing are really fun to use, don't get me wrong. But some of these items normally do so at the cost of a fun game experience for, well, everyone but the user. If the big three that I mentioned got reworked in the future somehow, I think I'd be a pretty happy camper. I think I've hit the nail on the head pretty well with this topic, but let me know what you think about these negation mechanics. I'm gonna let you folks carry on this conversation without me because hey, it's summer, I'm on my vacation, and I gotta get back to my beach and beer time. So peace out, and I'll catch you all next time, man.
Okay. Okay. I'm getting tired of being a nice guy. I'm gonna get tough.